this is a lot of information, and it's certainly a lot to keep in mind. So do you propose kind of a general rule of thumb, or something that we should keep in mind when we're tweeting and we're professionals?
In the book, I actually deal with that, and I've examined some of the public policies which are available online. For instance, in the book, I deal with Ogilvy's policy, global policy, and they really give fantastic tips like be respectful, be sincere, be authentic, speak in your own voice, think before you post, and just like common principles around sincerity, decency, respect, just evoking those basic principles of good manners, I suppose, in when you use your social media pages is a good rule of thumb. So it's quite interesting that many of the policies actually start with that. Just use common sense, be respectful, be mindful, don't think before you tweet, think before you post. And then, of course, there are some that have to be spelled out, like the breaches of confidentiality, breaches of restraint of trade. And then the other one that I was quite interested in is the LinkedIn concept. You create a whole lot of contacts which you would never have had if you hadn't been linked with the organization you work for. So you might be working for this organization, which is a public face, big organization, fantastic profile, great reputation. You would never have built the contacts that you have had you not worked for an organization that has this kind of reputation. Then when you leave, who do those contacts belong to? So that's quite an interesting aspect that I never thought of until I researched this book. So when you leave, do you get to take all those contacts with you? Are they yours? Who do they belong to? So all those things need to be regulated.
Is there an answer to that question?
Yes.
Are you going to give me the lawyer answer?
It's quite interesting.
Depends.
There's some very public cases around it. There was a lady called Koonsberg who worked for the BBC, and she created her contacts. BBC is a major organization, so the contacts she formed were as a result of her link to this major organization. The BBC let it go, which is quite interesting. I think they weighed up the damage of this very public face case against, is it worth pursuing this? And they allowed her, Laura Koonsberg, to take her contacts with her. LinkedIn, if you read those terms and conditions, actually says my agreement is with you, not with the organization. So they actually protect the employee, but it's important for organizations to protect themselves and make sure that they regulate what happens to those contacts.
Now, we've been speaking a lot about the employees, but really there's also a big responsibility on employers to set out social media guidelines and perhaps even educate their staff on what should and shouldn't be done.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that if you are leading a team of people who are quite active on social networks, that you have some type of policy in place?
Oh, sure. It's interesting, when I researched the book, there were some companies that said, you know what, it's going to happen anyway, and I'll just use my normal disciplinary code in order to pursue. I think it's important to actually spell it out to employees. That we talked about earlier, you want to say, what were you thinking? The thing is, employees don't think. They see social media as a completely different animal. So they don't see it as the same as kind of stealing money from the organization. It's such a new kind of sphere. So they don't think of it as following sort of quite traditional guidelines and traditional disciplinary procedures. I think it's important to spell it out. And one interesting comment that I found, so employers have two kind of approaches. They either overprotect and kind of over-monitor what employees do, and that makes employees resentful because they go, I manage a multi-million profile here, and you don't trust me to go on my Facebook page. So that's the one side. On the other hand, I think it's important to regulate certainly some aspects of it so that you give employees guidelines and train them and say to them, this is how we would want you to behave. Lest you don't know, this is how we would want you to behave.
I think that would probably save a lot of tears in the long run.
Certainly, and a lot of money.
Absolutely.
And time at the end of the day.